N4 lets us fully customize user access in our stations. We have several services that work together to allow us to accomplish these various levels of access. We have the category service, so we can limit access to certain areas of the station. Then we have the role service, where we create different roles for different types of users, and then we specify which categories that they're allowed to access based on their role. The role might be something like HVAC or energy or scheduler, something that would be specific to a type of user, not a specific user. Then we set permissions for the categories that are assigned to those roles. They can be read-only, write, invoke. We'll see the details of that later on in this lab. Then we create users and we assign roles to those users. Finally, we're going to create a navigation file or a nav file so that our users can have a home page when they log into a browser. I'm going to start with the category service. So let me collapse the things in my tree. And then I'll expand my services folder and I'll go to the category service. When I double click the category service, I land on the category browser. By default, I have two categories that are predefined, user and admin, and then I have category 3 through category 8. I'm going to change the names of category 3 and category 4, but I can't do that here. In order to change those names, I have to right-click my category service and go to the category manager view. Then I can hit the new button at the bottom of the page, add 2 more categories, and category 3 is going to be named user accounts, and category 4 is going to be named schedules. When I go back to my category service, you'll see that category 3 was renamed to user accounts and category 4 was renamed schedules. If I navigate in my category browser into my services folder, I'll find the user service here. I want to assign the user service to my user account category. Then I'm going to come down to my schedules folder and assign the schedules category to it. Pay attention to what happens to this pre-assigned category when I just press this cell in my category browser. See how that went away? If I leave it like this, anyone who needs to go into that schedule folder will have to be assigned the schedules category. A standard user won't be able to get there. So I'll click on the inherit box to put that back the way it was, and then I will uninherit this category, and my pre-assigned category will stay. Then I'll just add the schedules category to the schedule folder. I need to save my changes, but there's no save button down at the bottom of the screen. I need to come up to the toolbar and click on the save icon to save my work. Now I'm going to go into the role service and create some new roles. So I'll double click the role service, hit the new button, and I'm going to create 3 new roles. The first role is going to be called administrators, and they're going to become a super user. So the category restrictions are not going to apply to anyone that's assigned the administrator role. The second role is going to be called read only. I'm not going to make them a super user, which means I have to define the permissions that they have available. I'll hit the double chevron right here, and in the permissions browser, I'm going to make them read-only on the admin side and the operator side of the user category. They'll be able to see things that are in the user category, they just won't be able to make any changes. I'll go ahead and hit OK, and then I'll come down to my last role, And this one is going to be called Energy Managers. They won't be super users, so I'll hit the double chevron and I'll give them read, write, and invoke in the user accounts and the schedules category that I created. And I'll hit OK. All I've done at this point is define levels of access for these different roles. I'm going to go back to each role and assign hierarchies based on the role. So for the administrator's user, I'll click the double chevron next to viewable hierarchies, and I'll assign all 4 hierarchies to them. If I don't assign a hierarchy here, even though the administrator's role has been assigned super user permissions, they won't be able to see any of the hierarchies that I've created. So I'll hit OK. And then I'll come down to my read-only role, and I will assign the read-only role the graphics and the geo hierarchy. My energy managers are going to get to see the graphics only. I'll hit OK, OK again, and I'm done with roles. My next step is to create a navigation file so that when I go in and create a new user, I can assign that navigation file while I'm creating the user. The navigation file is a file, so I need to navigate down to the file space of my station. And right now I've got 3 folders. One is charts, PX, and template. I'm going to create a new folder in my file space. So right-click, new folder, and I'll call it nav. You don't need to create this folder. The nav file doesn't need to live in a folder called nav. This is just for organizational purposes. Over time, we might have a ton of different things over in the file space. The more we organize things, the better off we'll be later on. I'll hit OK. Then I'm going to right-click the nav folder and go to New Nav File. I'm going to call this nav file Homepage. Make sure that you leave the .nav there, or the station won't recognize this as a nav file. I'll hit OK. And when I expand this nav folder, my homepage.nav shows up. I'll double-click the homepage.nav file. By default, my home is station:pipe/slot:/. What does that mean? Well, if I come up to my config space and double-click it and hit Control-L to bring up the locator, you can see that this path is station:/pipe/slot. So if you forget to assign a nav file to a user and they go in and they log into a browser, this is where they land. This is their home page by default. That's not what I want. So I'll go back to my nav file, and I want this home page to be my boiler logic folder, because my boiler logic folder has my graphic on it, or has a graphic on it. I need to tell this ORD to point to the boiler logic folder. So I'll double click this target ORD slot. I'll use the little arrow over here and use the component chooser to select my boiler logic folder. I'll hit OK, OK again. You'll notice that there's no save button down at the bottom of the page. I need to come up here to this icon to save my nav file. The last part of this process is creating some new users. In my services folder, I have the user service available. I'm going to right-click the user service and go to the AX User Manager view. And I'm going to add a new user. So I'll go down to the New button and create a new user. When we set up our station template, I had you go in and add yourself as a user for your station. And I said later on in the course I'd talk about creating a user in detail. This is where we get to talk about creating users in detail. So the first user I'm going to create is going to be named John L. That's the actual login that you'll use to log in as this user. His full name is going to be John Lennon. This account will be enabled. I'm not going to let his account expire, but I could. I can make him a temporary user but still keep a record that I had John Lennon as a user in my station. I'm going to assign him the administrator's role. Every person that logs into a station, whether they're using Workbench or a browser, must have their own user account. Security, security, security. If we think that someone is giving out their credentials to someone else, we can turn off this allow concurrent sessions property, and we'll find out pretty quickly when they contact us and let us know that they can't get into the system because somebody else is logged in. For now, I'm going to leave that true. The auto log off settings will log them off of a browser or Workbench after 15 minutes. I'll go ahead and leave these default. Authentication scheme isn't going to come into play if we're using strictly N4, but if you have AX JASes that you need to bring into an N4 server, you'd need to create a user account and assign the AX digest scheme to that user in the AX station in order to get N4 to talk with an AX station. We're not doing that, so we're going to leave this set to digest scheme. The password is going to be password123, capital P, and I'm going to force him to change that when he logs in. When we create our user, we can just give out a standard password or an easy password and force them to change it to something that they can remember. By default, a password has to be 10 characters minimum with at least one capital letter and one number. I can also make their password expire. I'm not going to do that to John. He gets administrator level. The next user that we add, we're going to restrict them in a few different ways. Then I need to assign the nav file. So I'll use the little arrow, go to File or Chooser, go into my nav folder, and select Homepage. I'll hit Open, and then scroll down a little bit. The default web profile allows me to restrict access when I look at this in a browser. John's not going to get restricted at all. We're going to leave this default. We'll make some changes on the next user and see what happens. I'll hit OK, and John Lennon's been added to the station. I'm going to create another user, and this user is going to be Yoko O. Full name is Yoko Ono. Her account's going to expire tomorrow, and she gets the read-only role. Her password is going to be password123. And I will force her to change that. And the nav file is going to be the same one that I assigned to John. Then I'm going to restrict what she can see when she looks at this in a browser. I'm going to say no to everything except for the Navtree sidebar. And I'll hit OK. I'll create a third user that we're going to use in a later lab while I'm in here. And then I'm going to disconnect from my station and log in as these different users so you can see the differences between them. So my new user, the username is going to be called Station. And I'll assign it to the administrator's role. And my password will be Station12345. and everything else is okay. I'm not going to have any people log in with this user account. I'm going to use this account when the station on my computer talks to the station that's going to live in the Jace. So I'll hit OK. Now I'd like to see the differences between these two user accounts that I created. So in my tree, I'm going to scroll up to the station. I'll right-click my station, and I'll save it first. I'll right-click again and disconnect. Then I'll double-click the station and hit the Change User button. I'll log in as John L. and hit OK. Password 123, and it prompts me to enter a new password. It says my password must contain at least 10 characters, 1 digit, and 1 lower and uppercase character. So I'm going back to Old Faithful here, admin 12345, and confirm it, and I'll press the OK button. I'm logged in as John, and nothing really looks any different to me. I can still get to things. I can still get to the file space. I can see all of my hierarchies. If I expand Geo, I can see Fresno. Everything looks good. I'm going to disconnect again, and I'll log in as Yoko. So I'll change my user. Password 123. And I'll change her password to admin 12345. Hit OK. Now when I expand the station, it looks like I can see things. Let me go try and make a change to my schedule. I can't change anything. She can see things, but because she was assigned read-only, she's not allowed to make any changes in the station. She can only see what's there. If I expand my hierarchy tree, you can see only graphics and geo show up. Those are assigned in that read-only role. In Workbench, she can see a lot more things than what she'll be able to see in a browser. If I open up a browser and I want to navigate to the station that's running on my computer, I can type in https://localhost, hit enter, and I get a potential security risk ahead. This has to do with certificates. We cover this in the advanced class, but I'm just going to go to the advanced tab here and hit accept the risk and continue. I'm going to go ahead and log in as John. Admin 12345. Log in. And there's my Boiler Logic page. If I left click on the navigation tree icon over here on the left hand side of my browser, I can navigate through the station just like I was doing in Workbench. I'm going to disconnect as John by hitting this little X right here in the upper right hand corner of my browser. Yes, I want to log off. And then I'll change the user to Yoko. And log in. Admin 12345. And I get an error. Can't even get there. And if I look in this little code line here, it says some stuff, but then if I look a little deeper, permission exception RR is less than I. So something happened in the security setup. I didn't give Yoko enough privileges to actually see the graphic file that's assigned to this Boiler Logic folder. So when she logs in, she can't get anywhere. I wrote Yoko Ono into this lab on purpose so that you would see that if you're going to be using categories and roles, there are a lot of built-in dependencies between objects and folders and different things in the station. So when you are working with security and you want to use categories and roles, make sure that you test it forwards and backwards so that when your user logs in, they don't see something like this. I'm going to go back to my workbench and I'm going to disconnect and I'll log back in as Jeff. So I'll change the user to Jeff. I'll expand my station. I mentioned earlier when we were creating users that every person that logs into a station needs to have their own set of credentials. They need their own username and password. Security is extremely important. Hand in hand with security is the ability to track what every user does while they're in a station. So if I come down to my history space and I double click the audit history, it has a list of everything that I've done in my station. And if I scroll over, matter of fact, I can look at this numeric interval on discharge air, and it tells me that the history name was changed. The old value was %parent.name%, and the new value is this one. And if I keep scrolling, I can find out who did it. There it is, the username. If at the beginning of the course, I didn't have you create a new user for yourself, and I just left the admin user and did everything with the admin user, I wouldn't know who made changes to my station. Extremely important that every user has their own set of credentials.